In this video, we'll be creating the sessions table in the MySQL database. This will store user sessions and user access and refresh tokens, along with the expiry dates and times. If we open phpMyAdmin, we're in the tasks DB. If we create a new table called TBL sessions and 6 columns, go. First one is an ID. So this is a bit like a session ID. It's a big int. It's a primary key. Okay, that. And it's an auto increment. Give it a comment. So session ID. Next one is the user ID, because for each session it's associated with a specific user, which will link with a foreign key from the users TBL users table. So that needs to match, so it's a big int as well, because that's what it's stored as in the users table. Scroll along and we'll give it a comment of user ID. Next field is the place to store the access token. So access token, this will be a varchar and it'll be 100 characters. The correlation will be UTF-8, scroll down, and it'll be _bin. So a bit like what we used for the password, it is case sensitive, so we need to store it as a UTF-bin. Give it a comment. Access token. Then what we need to do is store an associated expiry date and time. So access token expiry. This is a date time. And we'll put a comment in for access token expiry date / time. Then it's a refresh token. This is a varchar, and this is also 100 characters, and UTF-8 _bin, because this is also case sensitive. So this is refresh token and refresh token expiry, and this is also a date time. Oops, wrong one. Date time, and then this is refresh token expiry date / time. Give it a comment. So this is sessions table, and the correlation for the other field, or just in general, UTF-8 _general case insensitive. So we need to save that. So now I've got our sessions table. The next thing we need to do is create some unique indexes on access token and refresh token. Because an access token, we can't have multiple rows in the table with the same access token, and the same goes for the refresh token. So the way you do that is tick, and then we want to click here for unique. And then tick for refresh token and click unique as well. So you can see here that's created the access token and refresh token as unique indexes. So this puts a constraint on the table to say a row in the database has to have a unique access token and a unique refresh token. Okay, the next thing we need to do, we need to create a foreign key on the table to say, well, the user ID and the sessions must exist in the TBL users table. So it links these two together. So we can't have a rogue session in here that doesn't link to any user. And the way that you do that, you click on relational view. So we need to give it a name here. So we'll call it session user ID _FK for foreign key. And then what we want to do is leave these on delete and on update as restrict. So what this should do is you can't delete a user ID, or sorry, a user where there's an active session. So we'd have to get rid of the sessions first, and then get rid of the associated user if we were deleting stuff. And the column that we're linking to is the user ID. So this is the user ID in the sessions table. And then we want to connect that to TaskSDB database, users table, and it's the ID of the user. So it's not the username, it's actually the physical ID of the user. We'll save that. So we've created that successful. So just to show you what that means is insert, we'll just manually insert a row here. So we'll give it a user ID, and you can see here that these are our two users that we created in the table, the users. So John Smith, Michael Jones, and the user ID next to it. So we can't create a session against a user that has an ID of 20 because there's not one exists. So it just allows you some validation on the table. So for example, if we create one against John Smith, create a random access token. This doesn't mean anything. I'm just typing in some test data here. And then give it a default. Yep. And then save. So now we've created the row. You can see here, we've got a session ID, a user ID, an access token that I've just randomly created, an expiry date and time, refresh token. Now what you'll find is, because that's hooked up to user ID 2, if I go to TBL users, go to browse, try and delete this John Smith, which has a user ID of 2, which that session is against. Click OK. We'll get an error message to say that we can't delete it because there's child rows. So what that means is that because we selected restrict on delete, we can't delete that user because it has associated sessions. Now if I now delete that session and then go to users, go to browse, should be able to delete this user now. So there you go. Because there's no sessions for that user, we can now delete that user. So it's just a way to put some constraints on the tables and on the database so you don't get any what's called orphan rows, which means that you might have a random session against a user that no longer exists. So it's just to keep it tightly integrated. So now that we've got our table created for sessions, we need to move on to creating the sessions endpoint or route that will allow us to log in as a user, which will create a session. So that's in the next video.